Rob McCowan podcast. Accept no invitations. I'm McCowan. That's Shannon over there.
Sirius XM 167.
Thank you. We're going to talk baseball for most of the program today, but we're going to get into the hockey stuff because I know everybody's knee deep into it. And if you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, or for that matter, an Edmonton or Calgary fan, you probably want to hear something. So we'll give you that too. Dan Shulman will join us, the voice of the Blue Jays on Sportsnet television. And we'll see what's on his alleged mind when we come back after these messages. McCowan, Shen, back with you. I'm inclined to say it's a rare day off for Dan Shulman, the voice of the Blue Jays on television. But truth is, you've had two of them this week already. Only worked 2 days, took 2 days off. But that was a long stretch of consecutive days for this ball club. Do you think fatigue has played a factor in the last 6 or 7 games for them?
I think maybe emotional fatigue more than physical fatigue. I talked actually to Cameron Maben, who's a former big league player, and he's now part of the Yankees broadcast. And we had never really known each other. And we were up on broadcast row at Yankee Stadium a couple of days ago, and we started talking about it. And he brought up the Blue Jays schedule, and he's a Yankee broadcaster. And he said, man, it's emotionally draining and it gets you after a while. So like I'm not making excuses for them. They certainly could be playing better baseball than they are. But I think between the schedule they've had, the injuries they've had, they've had a tougher road over the first 5-6 weeks of the season than most teams have. And the good news is, in theory, all that stuff evens out.
And when you think of the age of some of their young stars, is this must be a real learning curve for them too, then, don't you think?
Yeah, I think, John, that if you're talking about Guerrero and Bichette specifically, I think they went through a hell of a learning curve last year, to be honest with you. They went from Dunedin to Buffalo to Toronto. And even at the beginning of the year, they didn't know where they were. I mean, they didn't know at the beginning, would it be Dunedin to Toronto, all Dunedin to Buffalo? Like, we didn't know. Right. So I think being nomadic last year, being in a pennant race, missing the playoffs by 1 game, I think those young guys kind of got a crash course in big league lessons last season. So I think they're fine. As you guys know as well as I do, and I'm sure it's like this with hockey, basketball, and football as well, but boy, can baseball fans jump off an emotional cliff early and often when everything that we've ever learned suggests it's a long season. They're 1/5 of the way through the season. At the halfway point, it's a different story, but again, it hasn't gone great, but I think they're fine. The one area where I think they're pressing a little bit, and this is me speculating, is the whole runners in scoring position thing, which has taken on a life of its own because they have the worst batting average in baseball by a wide margin in those situations. It's not even like they're 29th or 26th. They're dead last by a wide margin. And that just is not something any of us would have expected to see, but it'll normalize. It'll get better over the course of the season, and they'll start scoring more runs.
Well, one of the things, and you've talked about this on the air, one of the things that has happened, I don't know whether this explains it or not, but this team was very aggressive on first pitches last year. And they are the opposite this year. They become quite passive with a few exceptions. Like Bichette will swing at anything that's in the ballpark, birds, baseballs, anything. Having said that, is it possible there's some deliberation to this? Is this being promoted internally?
It's a great question. And Tabby did mention it. It was either Tuesday or Wednesday of this week in the Yankee series. I'm not sure. And it's on my list of things to do on the off day today to dive into that and see how much more passive they are on first pitches. I think Simeon was a first pitch guy a lot. Matt Chapman, who's kind of taken his at bats, is not necessarily that sort of guy. Randall Grichuk is gone, and he was a very aggressive hitter. So maybe some of it is just a change in personnel, but it's an excellent question. I don't think it's being taught. I don't know why they would teach something different than last year when last year was so good offensively. That seems a little bit counterintuitive to me, but I'm really not sure. I think it's just one of these things where It happened, and then it happened again, and now it kind of takes on a life of its own. And even the guys who say, I don't read anything, I don't watch anything, I don't hear anything, they all know. They know they're struggling in these situations. You see Vladdy break a bat over his leg. There's frustration going on right now. But again, I think a month from now, this should all be a distant memory.
Yesterday, we had to do a hockey show, and we didn't get a chance to dissect Tuesday night. All that crap in the late innings.
Yeah.
Can you now that maybe we've had a sober second thought in 48 hours, can you figure out exactly what happened and why it happened?
Yeah, but I can't justify it because I thought it was incredibly poor judgment by the umpires. So what happened, and we found this out after the game when Alfonso Marquez, the crew chief, said there were some very harsh words exchanged between Josh Donaldson and Tyler Heineman. Now, we all, Josh.
Sorry
Donaldson,
to interrupt you, Dan. Sorry to interrupt you. When did they have a confrontation?
Earlier in Tuesday night's game.
Okay.
I can't pinpoint the exact moment for you, but earlier in Tuesday night's game.
But in that at bat?
No.
Earlier. Earlier at bat.
Innings earlier. Now, Josh Donaldson, as we all know, and I love him, and he was a great player in Toronto. He stirs it up, right? I mean, if he were a hockey player, John, like we'd be calling him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
He'd be Brad Marchand. He'd be Brad Marchand.
Yeah, exactly right. That's a great analogy there. So I doubt that Tyler Heineman, journeyman catcher, cup of coffee guy, started this, but that's just me. So anyways, now we didn't know this during the telecast, obviously. We didn't know this till after the game. So some harsh words were exchanged. So when Donaldson was hit 2 pitches after a home run, the umpires decided it was intentional. And as if Tyler Heineman ordered Jimmy Garcia to throw at Josh Donaldson. So a bunch of things here. A, they had just tied the game. When's the last time somebody hits a guy intentionally in a tie game? You hit a guy when you're down 11-1 and you're frustrated. He didn't do it on the first pitch. So we're thinking he throws a first pitch strike and then he's going to hit the guy. And it was a cold night and every pitcher was complaining about how slippery the baseballs were, right? Kikuchi was licking his hands like a cat all night long because he couldn't grip the ball. It was as poor a collective judgment call as I've ever seen. No feel for the game whatsoever. And I don't blame the Blue Jays for being incredibly unhappy. So it cost them Garcia, which meant they had to then go down the ladder a little bit and use another reliever. I don't know if they win the game if it doesn't happen, but I'll tell you how baseball feels about it, because when a pitcher gets thrown out for intentionally hitting a batter, 99.9% of the time, the manager is automatically suspended for a game. Charlie hasn't been suspended yet. He thought he was, and the Blue Jays thought he was. But apparently there was a phone call like half an hour before the game yesterday, the day game, where they said, we're going to take another look at this. You can manage today. Because I think baseball realizes they messed up. These umpires messed up badly. Here's another, and actually my son said this to me. He said, Dad, if Josh Donaldson thought he had been hit intentionally, don't you think he would have reacted at the plate when he got hit? And Josh Donaldson didn't do a thing. Exactly. He took off his elbow guard and he walked down to first base. And to me, that's another sign where here's a 21-year-old kid who's going, Dad, it's so obvious. And the umpires who have been doing this for years and years and years just had no feel for the situation.
Well, we're all old enough to remember in years gone by that more often than not, in a situation like that, the worst that happens is the umpires give both pitchers a warning.
Correct.
Now, we haven't changed the rules significantly to eliminate the possibility of a warning, have we?
No. And if they had come out and given warnings, I'm sure Aaron Boone then gets ticked off and says, well, what did we do? And it's a flawed system, even at its best. It's a flawed system. Again, like going to hockey, one guy cross-checks another guy from behind, and then the referee says, all right, next guy who rides somebody into the boards on either team, you're out of the game. You've been warned. And it's one of the million things that's just crazy about baseball. But they could have given warnings, but even more so, Bob, I think it was obvious he didn't do it. It was 3-3 in the 6th inning. The problem was is they had just given up a home run. They had just given up a home run. So the assumption was, again, it doesn't make any sense that because the home run is one part of it, and then the Donaldson-Heineman words are another part of it, and they connected the two, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'll give you another example of why we should be curious about this. Again, historically, my recollection is 9 times out of 10, the umpire in charge of that decision to throw a pitcher out is the home plate umpire. That's who makes that call, and it's made without consultation to the other umpires. Now, I'm not saying this has never happened where they've gathered and made a decision, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But the fact the home plate umpire gave no indication of his belief that it was intent. And so you now have an umpire that's on base who is clearly had to convince the other 3 guys of the decision that he had himself had made.
Well, the home plate umpire, Lance Barrett, he also did an unusual thing. As soon as Donaldson was hit, and again, Donaldson, watch it again. It's just another hit by pitch.
Yeah.
But Lance Barrett comes out from behind the plate
and gets between Garcia and Donaldson, right? To walk up in case
nothing
there's
is happening. So Barrett and Barrett was on edge because, again, I think the combination of the home run that had been hit and the words that had been exchanged. He had heard the words that had been exchanged. So he gets out in between them. Donaldson goes to first, and then Barrett calls a meeting of the umpires. And at that point, Bob, I think it's in the hands of the crew chief.
Right.
Maybe it's a democracy. I don't know. All 4 of them are talking, but it was the crew chief. Once it gets to that point, I think it does make sense that it's the crew chief who was actually the one who said you're out of the game.
I mean,
Marquez was.
The only guy I think it was justified in getting tossed was Pete Walker, because at least he got mad.
Oh, well, Pete can get mad. Yeah. Pete can go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat. He can get mad. So I understand why he was mad. Charlie was in full, what's happening?
Disbelief.
Stop throwing people out. What's going on mode, right? And Charlie didn't get kicked out in the moment when his pitcher supposedly threw at a hitter. And then Charlie got kicked out later when the pitch was up and into Bo Bichette, which is a whole other part of the story. Not a huge part, but I thought Bo Bichette handled it beautifully. He was interviewed after the game, and he said, no, I don't think he was throwing at me, just like we weren't throwing at them. Like Bo was one of the few grownups in the whole situation. But there was yelling from the Blue Jay dugout because it was up and in on Bo.
Oh, yeah.
Now with his hair, everything looks a little more up and a little more in, because when he's moving, it's like the Ron Duguay was fast thing. The longer your hair is, the more things look a certain way. But it was up and in, and it was 97. And somebody yelled from the dugout, and I don't know if you guys saw the shot because you said you were doing a hockey podcast, but somebody got thrown out, and Charlie turned around and then goes, me?
I saw that.
Yeah,
I was shocked. Well, as Charlie was.
I don't know what he said. Maybe it was somebody else. Yeah. Maybe it was John Schneider. Maybe it was a player. I don't know. But the whole thing bordered on the ridiculous, I thought. And it all started with just a poor field from the umpires.
Well, you know that there are fans out there that raise this question every time we get into this, officials and the only Canadian team in baseball. Is there a level of favoritism? Do the Blue Jays get a fair break from the umpires?
Yeah.
Do they?
It's funny. I heard that at Yankee Stadium this week.
There you go.
I don't think there is a conspiracy against them. And I hope I'm right, because I'd hate for there to be a conspiracy.
You have to be right, Dan. You have to be right.
I really hope I am. There's this, there was a game earlier this year where Jeff Nelson was the home plate umpire. And it was probably the worst home plate game that I've ever seen, at a game I called, in terms of the strike zone. And the vast majority of them went against the Blue Jays. And because technology and analytics are as they are these days, you can go on the internet, you can find all sorts of objective analytical sources about, did it look like I think it looked like? One of them is a Twitter feed. I think it's called Umpire Scorecards, which just does every single game. Here are the worst misses. And based on run probability, if it's a 2-0 pitch instead of a 1-1 with 2 men on and 1 out, it's all just math. This team is likely to score that number of runs instead of this number of runs. So you can come up with a number where On average, this umpire's calls benefited Team X or Team Y by however many 0.28 runs or 1.1 runs in this game. And I know at that time, a couple of weeks ago, somebody did a bigger thing and said, well, let's add up all of the team's games, every team's games. And the Blue Jays were like, they were near the bottom. They weren't dead last, but they were not getting the favorable calls. They were like 28th out of 30 in terms of were they being called fairly. That having been said, I cannot believe that, Major League Baseball is telling Major League umpires, if you have a chance, screw the Blue Jays because they don't draw ratings on TV in the US. That's a huge leap for me. I just can't go there.
No, and I'm not making that leap, and I'm not even suggesting there is anything to it. What I'm saying is that, as you have acknowledged, there is a constituency of Blue Jay fans who have come to the belief that their team is getting screwed by the umpires.
Yeah, well, Raptor fans were the same way, right? I mean, Raptor fans have the same feelings. Yeah.
Yep, you're right. And and Maple Leaf fans probably when they play American teams, who knows?
Now we're grasping at straws.
Who the hell knows?
If you lose, there's a conspiracy. That's the bottom line.
Well, we get that, and we get that fans overreact to this kind of stuff. But then when you see, we have now had 2 specific games, at least in the last 2 weeks, Danny, where weird shit has happened.
But this isn't a team, Dan, that is known for chippiness or cheeky comments back to umpires, is it? I mean,
and that's one of the things that in this conversation I was having at Yankee Stadium with this person. Like, if you go back to 2015 and 2016. Without naming names, it's really easy to come up with 4 or 5 guys that you could imagine umpires didn't like.
Yeah, Jose Bautista.
It's really easy.
Yeah,
this team is not like that. Pete Walker will yell, but I don't think out of the ordinary for a coach. John Schneider will yell, but not out of the ordinary for a coach. If Charlie's not the nicest of the 30, he's on the podium. He's one of the top 3, right? I mean, Charlie's not giving anybody any trouble. And, go through the lineup. Bo doesn't say, start at the top. Springer will make a face every now and again if he doesn't like a call. Right. Bo doesn't say a word, never says a word to an umpire. Vladdy will show frustration a little bit. And I think he's had the just cause to. Teoscar Hernandez is one of the nicest human beings you've ever met. Lourdes Gurriel doesn't bother anybody. Matt Chapman doesn't bother anybody. Alejandro Kirk doesn't say a word. Santiago Espinal doesn't say a word. So I don't see why anybody would have it in for any of the guys on this team.
Anyway, I'm one of those guys, when I see a manager come out of the dugout, I want him to be mad. I want him to, I loved Earl Weaver.
Yeah. Then this year's Charlie is more than you like this year's Charlie.
But I still don't. I just can't imagine Charlie even being mad.
No. His mad is still like a 3 out of 10 on the Weaver scale, right? Or the Lou Piniella or the Billy Martin or any of these guys. But Charlie's just that nice of a person. But and Charlie will never say they're screwing us or Charlie's not going to go there. Charlie is not an excuse maker. It's the same part of his DNA that never complained about Dunedin and Buffalo and all that stuff. Charlie is, we'll figure it out. We're good enough to do it. We got the guys. That's how Charlie's wired.
All right, so this one's a little ridiculous, I think, but here's one of the things I heard, an explanation for the umpires, their arrogance, which...
Who, the Blue Jays' arrogance?
No, the umpires' arrogance.
Oh, okay, yeah, well.
Which sort of relates to what happened. It has happened all year long, is the umpires have convinced themselves that Major League Baseball is going to make them, at least the home plate umpire, just a puppet, that they're going to go with electronic balls and strikes. And the home plate umpire is not going to do nothing but do what he's told, strike, ball, whatever. And this is their rebellion against it. Oh yeah, if that's going to happen and we're going to be muted, our opinion is going to be muted, watch this. We're just going to call whatever we want.
It's interesting. I mean, if they don't want the automatic balls and strikes, they should call the strike zone better, but it's a hard job. And I
acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But
I think honestly, it's the Brad Marchand theory that we were talking about right at the beginning. I think Josh Donaldson did Josh Donaldson things, which he did as a Blue Jay too. and he got under the skin of some people, and a situation elevated, and the words were nasty. And I think it was an in the moment combination of the home run and the words that had been exchanged earlier. And they made a very poor choice.
You see, Josh is enough of a hockey fan. He'd appreciate the comparison, I
He
think.
probably will. Yeah. Yeah. If he's in a good mood next time I see him, I'll bring it up and see if he likes it.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with you in any way. The only thing that I wonder is, it wasn't the home plate umpire that threw Garcia out of the game, and it was the home plate umpire that was probably the only umpire that knew about the confrontation that had taken place an inning or two before.
I believe the first base umpire knew as well. From what I understand, Donaldson was in the dugout, like leaning over the railing at the time. So,
it wasn't while he was at the plate.
I don't believe it was while he was at this. So I think the home plate umpire and the first base umpire, who again was the crew chief, I think they both, and it's the kind of thing, and I'm sure we keep making hockey references here, but I'm sure between innings, unbeknownst to anybody, the words are exchanged, and maybe the two umpires during the commercial break after the third inning or whatever talked to each other and said, "Did you hear what I heard?" And let's just keep an eye on that. And so I think, the fuses were a little bit shorter, and it happened. And the fact that it happened against the Yankees in New York obviously heightens conspiracy theories. Like it's this stew had all of the ingredients necessary to make this happen. But big picture, if you're the Blue Jays, you can't feel sorry for yourselves. You got internal things you got to fix, and you got to fix them relatively soon, because they've still got a decent record, but they've given back a lot of the good start that they had.
Well, we're going to get to that. Part 2 of our conversation with Dan Shulman after these messages. McCowan and Shannon on the podcast / radio program, and Dan Shulman of Sportsnet, the play-by-play voice of the Blue Jays, is with us. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. At the beginning of this season, I don't want to say anybody else, but I'm assuming you guys are in a similar position. Little, if any, concern about the offense. This was going to be, if not the best offensive team in baseball, one of the best offensive teams in baseball. It looked like, with the possible exception of the fifth starter, that their first 4 starting pitchers were going to be just fine and maybe really good. The bullpen was always going to be a question mark, but that was where all the questions were being raised. The bullpen has had moments. What grade would you give this bullpen out of a 10, let's say?
Out of a 10, first couple of weeks, I would have given them a 9, I think. But last couple of weeks, probably like a 6, because Romano's had 2 hiccups. Simber had 1 that I remember. Meza, who's really great, like really an unsung guy on this team.
He gave up
1 hiccup, I think. So, and Jimmy Garcia had 1 as well. They were pretty bulletproof. When they started out 15-8, and guys like me were saying they're 9-2 in 1-run games, they could have lost a lot of those games. Like there were games where the other team hit a ball a mile, but just foul. Mm-hmm. Or a Blue Jay popped one up and it just reached the seats, and they got another pitch, and then they got a base hit. The baseball guy, and people don't see that stuff. Whenever things go against your team, you see it. Whenever Lady Luck smiles on your team, sometimes you don't see it as much. And I thought Lady Luck smiled on the Blue Jays a bit during the 15-8 start. So, and the bullpen was great. Romano was great. Every single game virtually that he came into was a 1-run game. He didn't even have 2 or 3-run games. Now he had a 2-run lead against the Yankees this week, and he couldn't get through it. So recently, the bullpen hasn't been as good. I think it's a good bullpen. I'd love to see a couple of things. So if Hyunjin Ryu is going to be fine, Ross Stripling is going to go back to the bullpen and be a 2 or 3 inning guy who I think, if nothing else, can give them a 2 or 3 inning guy and save some of the other guys. And I'd really like to see Ryan Borucki be able to pitch like I think he can pitch, and like he pitched a few years ago, just to be that second lefty. But at the trade deadline, could they use another guy? Sure. Everybody can always use another arm, and you can always find another bullpen arm. So overall, I think the bullpen has been good enough. Okay. The offense has been the biggest part of the problem.
Sure.
Well, and that's the surprise. And you can point to, and justifiably, their inability to hit with runners in scoring position, or even with runners on base. There's truth in those numbers. But overall, they haven't hit well. Vladdy got off to a great start and then went cold as ice, as cold as I've seen him for an extended period of time. Bo was awful for the first, month? And it's only been the last few games that he sort of seemed to come out of it. And we can go down the list and everybody's kind of the same. Nobody has consistently, well, right now, is anybody hitting above their expectation? I would say no. Maybe.
Espinal is, yeah. So
I don't think so. I'm going to argue with you there because this is a guy who hit 300 last year. Granted, in limited appearances, but
yeah, he's hitting for more power this year. It's it's been much discussed. He's gained 15 pounds. He's got, I think he's second in the majors in doubles or something like that. Keep in mind too, offense is noticeably down this year, whether it's the drag on the baseball and all that BS and whatever. But I would say Espinal's hitting above. I would say Springer is hitting at expectations.
Yeah, fair.
And that's about it. Honestly, everybody else would be below where you would expect them to be. And that's why you assume maybe regression to the mean isn't the right term when it's going to get better, but some progression to the mean, I guess it would be the way to say it. Kirk has gotten hotter. Bo has gotten hotter. Teoscar has come back from the IL. I got to believe Gurriel's going to hit more than this at some point. He has proven himself, I think, over 2 or 3 years. But listen, Marcus Semien hit whatever he hit, 45 home runs, 47 something. Marcus Semien was third in MVP balloting, and you take him out of the lineup, there's a gaping hole there. So I don't think they're going to be as good offensively, but I still think they can be good enough. Whenever I got asked before the season, how do they win more than 91 games? All I talked about was pitching, because I don't know that they could ever be expected to be better than last year or even as good as last year offensively. I thought the gains they could make were on the pitching side.
So did they miss Teoscar as much as everybody thinks they did when he was out?
I think so. Oh, sure.
I mean, when this goes probably to even the batting order and where he positions and what the insulation he becomes for Guerrero, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And people will argue on both sides of how much lineup protection actually means, but I got to believe it means something. It can't mean nothing. So if you're Vladdy, you didn't have the best option behind you because Teoscar was on the IL and the guy in front of you, Bo Bichette, was really cold. So it just, last year there were men on base constantly. And they had a ton of opportunities. So I think at the beginning of the year, if your number 1 guy, Springer, your number 3 guy, Vladdy, and your number, say, 8 guy, Espinal, those are the only guys really hitting. It's tough to string hits together. And that's what they haven't been able to do. If you look at their numbers, whatever you want to look at, exit velocity, hard hit percentage, barrels, like some of the underlying numbers, they're better than you would think they are, given the runs that they've scored. What they haven't done is string the hits together. There'll be games where they out hit the other team 8-7 and they lose 5-2 because they get a hit an inning and they leave a man on every inning and the other team goes bloop, bloop, blast, and they get 3 runs on 1 hit. Like the Yankee game on Wednesday, yesterday was a perfect example.
First inning.
Well, so the Blue Jays score in the first inning, but leave a couple of men on like they've been doing the whole road trip. But then the Yankees come up against Barrios in whatever inning it was, 4th maybe, and he's been great. And Anthony Rizzo hits an 8-hopper and gets a base hit. DJ LeMahieu flares one into right center for a base hit. And Gleyber Torres hits one 361 feet for a home run. Later on in the game, Matt Chapman hit one 390 feet for a sacrifice fly because Gleyber hit his that way and Chapman hit his that way. Now, I'm not, it is what it is, right? Some teams get luckier than others and it's part of the game. But just like I said, Lady Luck was smiling on the Blue Jays the first 3 weeks. It has not been smiling on them lately. But what they've got to do is just get a few more men on base and come up with some clutch hits, and they will. There's no way. I'd be surprised if any team in history has ever hit 181 over a whole season with runners in scoring position, and it's certainly not going to be this group that's the first.
I know. We're going to have checked the 62 Mets.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Do you have any confidence in Hyun-Jin Ryu when he returns?
Can you ask me that in 72 hours?
No. No, I'm asking you now because by that time we will have seen what he is at least one more time.
I don't know. I really don't have a feel for that. The days of ace, it's funny, 2020, only 2 years ago. And I know it was a short season, so he only made 12 starts, the COVID season. He finished third in for the Cy Young. Third. That's how good he was. And then for the first 3.5, 4 months of last year, he was still really good. Not Cy Young level, but really good. And then the wheels fell off at the end of last year, and then he didn't look good at all at the beginning of this year. I don't have a feel for it, Bob. I think from now on, if he could be one of these twice through the order, maybe get him through 5 innings, give up 2 or 3 runs, I think they're going to accept that and be okay with that. The good news is they don't need him to be there 1, 2, or even 3, because it's Gausman, Manoah, Barrios. Those guys are all ahead of Ryu. They just need guys like Ryu and Kikuchi to be decent, just to not get blown out like Ryu did early this year and Kikuchi did early this year. But level of confidence, I don't even know how to answer it. It's such a great unknown right now. I don't think we know until we see him.
And Kikuchi? No, I'm just like Kikuchi is as advertised.
Well, the Kikuchi experience has been an interesting one. I don't know how many of his 7 starts you've seen.
All of them.
I mean, he's been great and awful and everything in between. They've changed his windup. They've changed his pitches. They've changed his pitch mix. They've changed everything. So his last 2 have been his best 2. This guy was an all-star last year and didn't make it to the end of the season in the rotation. He was so bad in August and September. That's a hard thing to do also, to go from being an all-star to a reliever in the same year. The last 2 have been really good. The other thing I'll say in Kikuchi's defense, he's made 6 starts this year, 3 against the Yankees, 2 against the Astros, and 1 against the Red Sox. That's a tough draw. Like even if you are a Blue Jay hater and don't want to hear any of this, that's a tough draw. So, he's going to get his share of easier games. But I don't think he's, it's like with Robbie Ray. We're watching Robbie Ray, and there was a good one and a good one and another good one. And at what point do you say, this is who he is? I don't think we know who you say Kikuchi is yet, but his last 2 have been his best 2.
Well, I'll tell you what I love about this guy. And I mean, I know this is historic. Historically, left-handers have not thrown as hard as right-handers, right? Mm-hmm. Left-handers tend to be soft throwers, more breaking balls, trickier guys. Now there's exceptions to everything.
There's a guy named Chapman in New York that might disagree with you.
Randy Jansen is who I was going to mention.
But you're right. There are a lot of Jimmy Keys and Tom Glavines out there from the left side. So
thank you. And I didn't pay any attention to Kikuchi when he was in Seattle. So I was intrigued to see what I saw. And I started seeing him throw fastballs 96, 97. I went, whoa, wait a sec. Yeah. If you can throw a fastball 96, 97, you can get major league hitters out. And there seemed to be a deference to the breaking ball. And I think since the beginning of the season, they have changed that.
Yes.
That they've told him, your fastball is good enough to get people out. Throw the fastball. Don't you think?
Yes. So a few things there. If you look at the average fastball velocity for every starting pitcher on the Blue Jays, you say Kikuchi is number 1. He throws harder than Gausman, harder than Barrios, harder than Manoah. Big burly Alek Manoah. Manoah's amazing because he doesn't throw. Every now and again, you'll see a 96, but he's really 93, 94.
That's right.
But his stuff is so good, late life movement, whatever, that he gets a ton of swings and misses. Kikuchi is the hardest throwing starting pitcher they have. And maybe the second hardest throwing pitcher of all of them, behind only Jordan Romano. So I think they're trying to get him to trust his fastball. If you go back and look at a Baseball Savant or Fangraphs or whatever for last year, he threw his slider and his cutter a ton, and they got hit like crazy. And his fastball and it's a splitter, but he likes to call it a changeup. Those were the 2 pitches that he had good success with, but he didn't throw them as much as you would think. And I think the Blue Jays are just trying to convince him, look at the numbers. And I don't know if he's stubborn or afraid of contact or what it is, but they've tried to convince him, throw your fastball more. And what they've done is he had a 91 mile an hour cutter and a kind of a loopy 83 mile an hour slider. And they kind of condensed them into one pitch. And it's now like an 88, 89 slider, like Robbie Ray. I'm not saying this guy's going to be Robbie Ray, but it's the same velocity and the same idea, a harder slider like Robbie Ray. So he's actually, Bob, gone from being a 4-pitch guy to a 3-pitch guy because they combined them too. And they're trying to convince him to throw the fastball more. And you're right. If he throws it in the strike zone, he will be successful. Another funny thing, if you look at his numbers last year, when he was behind in the count, almost every pitcher, when they are behind in the count, throw their fastball more. He threw his fastball less. And so obviously there's something about it where he's not quite believing in how good his fastball is. And you could almost sit on a slider when he's 2-0, like he was pitching backwards, if you know what I mean. So they're working on everything from the mechanics of a pitch to the leg kick, and a lot of stuff up here too about how to pitch sequencing and how often to throw each pitch. That's a lot for a guy on a new team with a language barrier. He's got an interpreter, obviously, but with a language barrier too. That's a lot for him to change in about 6 weeks.
I think it's important that we explain to the unsophisticated baseball fan that the pitcher, while the catcher puts down the fingers or hits the buttons now, the pitcher ultimately has the choice as to what to do. But there are pitchers that are far more deferent to what a catcher calls, and other guys who say, I don't care what you put down, I'll keep looking for a new sign till I get what I want.
Yeah.
Where is he? Do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. You know, on one end of the spectrum was a guy like Mark Burley who never shook off a catcher. Ever. Literally never shook off a catcher.
Yeah.
He just said, you do the thinking, I'll do the pitching. And then there are guys like a Hyunjin Ryu who really, really, really calls his own game. And it took Danny Jansen a long time to figure out, to get on the same page with Hyunjin Ryu. And having mentioned Danny Jansen's name, I don't think that's something that has had no impact on the Blue Jays. Danny Jansen has been around enough and has earned the trust of the pitchers enough where maybe if Danny Jansen puts down a certain pitch, you're more likely to trust him than if one of the other guys does, just because he's more experienced than some of the other guys, or you have more of a relationship with him. You know, again, like I said, I don't know with Kikuchi if he's stubborn or if it's just that he didn't trust some of his stuff. I think it's that he didn't trust some of his stuff because the last two starts noticeably different. And the way it works with analytics now, you know, in an 0-0 count, McCown is susceptible to a cutter. You're calling a cutter. Like there's some room for feel and intuition, but not nearly as much as when we all started watching baseball, as we know. So it's a little bit more predictable, I think, in what pitches the catcher is going to put down. I think Kikuchi has really warmed up the last couple of weeks to the suggestions that are being given to him by the team. And when your ERA is, you know, up around 6, you better be receptive to suggestions. So,
So last question for me, Dan, is, you know, as we look at this team and we look at the major league roster, and I don't know everybody who's playing in Buffalo, but I'm always surprised the last few weeks I've seen a new name come up and a new guy come up. Is this team deep enough?
Borderline, I would say. So they've had some injuries too, right? They had 6 guys on the IL. Now I think they've gotten 2 of them back, but they still have, as we speak, Jansen, Ryu, Biggio, Pearson, all on the IL, who, if they were healthy, I believe would all be on the major league roster in one role or another. I think their depth is borderline right now. It's not terrible, but it's not great.
But you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? It's like there are guys there saying, well, hold on, where did he come from? That when we talked about this team winning the American League East, he wasn't going to be on the roster.
Right. But that happens. 26 man. I mean, it's a 26 man roster. It's a 45 to 50 man operation over the course of a season. And we'll see others. You know, we may see a Nathan Lucas, who I saw a lot in the spring and I thought was really impressive. But you're right. Gosuke Kato showed up and then he's gone. And now he's in another organization. And now Vinny Capra's up and pinch hitting in the 9th inning against Aroldis Chapman because they don't have another right-handed bat on the bench. So the bench is, in my opinion, suspect right now. But if they get Jansen and Biggio back, then either those guys are out of the game, or if they're in the lineup, then maybe Kirk is on the bench, or you get my point. So maybe, so I think part of it is getting healthy, but you can't assume you're going to go through a whole season healthy because no team does. And so I think there's room. I think they need another bat. I get stuck on the fact that so many of them are right-handed hitters. I think they need a decent left-handed bat they can bring off the bench. But there are times in a game where every bat on the bench is left-handed because they've got every righty in the lineup. Like the pieces of the puzzle offensively, to me, still are not fitting together optimally. And they're good enough that they can still be really good without that. But I do think there's got to be a little roster tinkering here, John. And They went early last year. They got Simber and Richards in June, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not sure that's the worst idea this year to address your needs in June rather than waiting till July 31st.
I assume you haven't had, I don't know whether you saw him in spring training, but have you seen the kid catcher yet?
I have not seen him in person. The reports from Buffalo are okay. I think better defensively right now than offensively. He hasn't hit at Buffalo like he did in the Arizona Fall League and like he did in AA last year. I don't think anybody's worried. I think everybody thinks he's great, but they're not going to rush him right now, especially if Jansen comes back soon and is the best version of himself. I don't think they're going to rush him, but we could see Moreno, Gabriel Moreno later this year. Jordan Groshans, who's been a name, former first-round pick, he's now at AAA, just been there about a week, and he's hitting well. So he's another guy to keep an eye on. But most of the way, in my opinion, this team is going to get better is for the guys to just do what they're capable of doing. The guys they have, just to, it's like people say, you just look at the numbers on the back of the bubble gum card. They don't have to exceed them. They just have to be their average selves, and I think they'll be okay.
Well, it doesn't get any easier this weekend in Tampa, and it's not a critical series, but I think some fans will think it's extremely important, and it probably is too. We'll see how they make out this weekend. Danny, we love you. Thanks for joining us, pal.
All right. Thanks, guys. Be well.
Hey, have a great time in Syracuse with your son. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, congrats to him.
Yes, the third one is graduating. We're getting there.
But you know what now, Dan? The key thing, we all think of Freedom 55, and it's not when you turn 55. It's when he turns 55.
Yeah, I'm 55 now. The third one's graduating, but the first one's going back to school, and now I've got a fourth one. So I would take Freedom 72. That's my goal right now. So.
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Dan Shulman, we'll come back with more after these messages. McCown and Shannon back with you. Our thanks to Dan Shulman for stopping by, especially on an off day.
Yeah.
And
what was his idea?
Oh, to do it on the off day. Well, I guess
because he's taking the weekend off to go to Syracuse for his son's graduation.
Yeah, he took the Cleveland series off too, didn't he?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. So actually, he hasn't had that big a grind. I take back everything I said. That was sympathetic.
Well, it's certainly not as tough as the Jays players.
Well, hockey dominates the headlines and the interest level across this country right now, and no place less than right here in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
I must tell you, I have been amazed at the reaction I get while I'm watching Maple Leaf games. It's almost as if everybody I know has a periscope that can view into my family room and knows that I'm actually watching the games. I don't remember this ever happening before. I get more texts in the middle of Leaf games now than I've ever gotten before.
We've converted you to being a hockey fan, Bob. That's
well, no, you haven't. No, you haven't. But I have been watching.
Good.
Now I confess, when Tampa scored 2 goals in the first 6 minutes,
did you turn it off?
I went to the baseball game.
Oh, well, the baseball game was compelling, though. It was easy to go to the baseball game.
Well, and then I had a hard time coming back, but I did come back and did see the finale there. But the question everybody wants to know is, can they put them away tonight? Can the Maple Leafs go in there and win another game on the road with a Tampa team that has now played how many playoff games without losing 2 in a row?
Well, the 16 series, they've gone. They were 16-0 after losing a game in a playoff series. 16-0.
Yeah.
So it's pretty impressive. Here's the thing, Bob. When it comes to Tampa, they have yet to play, in my opinion, a 60-minute game. There appears to be at times either disinterest or lethargy or just plain tired at times with the Lightning. Kucherov, it's almost like, when you talk about actors on Broadway or singers on Broadway, I'm not sure Kucherov can hit the high note right now. I'm not sure. Steven Stamkos is as good as he's been. Can he hit the high note? Braden Point, can he hit the high note?
Well, Kucherov has basically disappeared.
Well, and that was his MO prior to the Stanley Cup years. You know, that's what he did against Washington. That's what he did against Columbus. That's what he did against, Boston. They didn't have it. Victor Hedman has been magnificent through this whole series. To me, he's been the linchpin. Everybody,
I know you.
I love the guy.
Love affair with Hedman. I get
I
it.
do.
And he's a great player.
And here's the other
Move
guy
on.
here's the other guy that hasn't hit the high note. Andre Vasilevsky hasn't hit the high note.
May not.
And may not be able to now.
May not.
And that becomes,
He hasn't had one really good game. He's had
No.
good moments.
right. Like Jack Campbell, say the criticism that Jack Campbell took the last 4 months. Jack Campbell's been really good, I think. I mean, without Jack Campbell in game 5, they don't win that series. He was fantastic.
Really?
He was, yes.
No,
Second half of the first period, he kept them in it, and then he made some great saves in the third period when
he's
Tampa was
been
trying to
fine.
press.
He has been fine.
Good enough to win.
Disappointed in him. Well, good enough to win because Tampa hasn't been good enough. That's
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I just wonder why. I mean, we use that word dynasty too many times, and to win 3 in a row, I think it's difficult for these guys.
Well,
I think that's the challenge. I mean, with the will to win, is it different after you've won 2 Stanley Cups?
sure it is. And the understanding, this Maple Leaf team doesn't even know what winning 16 games is about. They're not even thinking about winning 16 games.
They'd
This
like to win
Tampa
4.
team, this Tampa team knows
Yeah.
this is just round 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're going to win it, they're going to have to go 7 games in
Yeah.
order to win this. And then they got 3 more series left to go
Mhm.
against teams that are every bit as good or better than the Toronto Maple Leafs. And maybe that's in the back of their head right now.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
That holy cow, I'm pooped, I'm hurting, I'm sore, and we barely started this
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they've been through it. They know.
Yeah.
Maple Leafs don't know.
Yep, that's a good point. It really is a good point. And then you got the Edmonton Oilers on the other side of the continent in a similar scenario as Tampa, although they're on the road in Los Angeles tonight. And I'll tell you what, it's I think it's a nervous time for the Oilers because
Oh yeah.
LA has played such quality, disciplined hockey the last 2 games. I'm not sure the Oilers know how to play that. I'm not sure they do. They've showed signs of it at times during the regular season in this series, but boy, oh boy, the last two nights, Todd McClellan's team has said, we're just going to play our game. We're not going to try to compete with the Oilers at their game. We're going to play our game. And they have succeeded very well.
Well, name me the last time you've seen a series like this where you've got a team up 3 games to 2. The 2 games they've lost, they were completely wiped out.
Outscored 14-2. I can't remember.
6-0 and 8-2.
Yeah. I can't remember, Bob.
I don't remember one ever being like this.
Yeah. There were some strain. Let me put it this way. If it happened, it's a long time ago. It is a long time ago.
I don't remember it ever.
Yeah. And so that becomes the issue. And what's rearing its ugly head now in Edmonton is, the same issues that people talked about. Can Mike Smith stop a key puck at a key time? Because he didn't in game 5. He didn't. And then Jay Woodcroft gets in. There's a disease, and I've seen it with at least 4 coaches. There's a disease that when in doubt, we panic and put the 2 guys together, Draisaitl and McDavid, and then there's nothing else for the rest of the time. And that's really the challenge. I mean, I'll be fascinated to see how much time McDavid and Draisaitl play together tonight. And that might be the measure of whether the game's going to be pro Edmonton or pro Los Angeles.
Well, along that line, and going back to the Toronto-Tampa series, I think tonight's game will be determined by the play of Marner and Matthews.
Again, huh?
I think virtually every game and every important game. And as I said the other day, and I don't know whether you agreed or not, but I thought Matthews was ordinary to well below average until He got that rebound in the third period and popped it into the empty net.
Mm.
Um,
I don't agree with you, but that's fine.
well, I just thought he was floating.
Yeah.
And because I spent a lot of time watching him float.
Yeah.
But if those two guys are going, the Maple Leafs win game 6.
Well,
I
and remember, game 5, you're right about Matthew scoring the winning goal, but those two, the two other
Well,
big
that's
stars
documentable. It's not an opinion.
yeah, the two other big money guys in the team actually played their best games of the playoffs too. Tavares and Nylander played their best games, and I think in the end it's finally the big four have to play well together. The big four, because that's the inconsistency of all of them playing well on the same night in this series has been a challenge for the Maple Leafs. It really has.
Well, I think tonight's game for Tampa is about heart. Do they have the heart and the will and the desire to tough it out, knowing they have to win 2 in a row now against a team that won't roll over and be beaten easily? And I think we're going to find out real quick.
Yeah. I actually, if you sit here and you ask me if what my gut is for game 6, I think Toronto wins.
I do too.
I think Toronto wins, but it also gives a great example of, viewers and fans and people in our world not understanding momentum or what momentum is, and the difference between actual physical momentum that a team has and the emotional momentum that we think we see. Because the ebbs and flows in every playoff series is, well, this team's horseshit now.
Yeah.
This team's good now. Well, no, Christ, it's only been one game. It's only been one game.
We'll find out shortly.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. And our thanks to Dan Shulman for joining us on the program. Dale Talon with us tomorrow.
What?
We hope you'll join us for that.
Was it a golf show or is it a hockey show?
We'll find out. We'll decide at the moment. McCowan, see you.